welcome everyone to today's webcast. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce myself and the lovely people that we have with us. So I'm Shifi Silverstone from Doctorpedia, and as a mother as well to 6 children, I think this topic today that we're going to speak about is very relevant to me and to many people that I know that I speak to, whether it's other parents, other people that I speak to. So I think this will be very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to this. So before we begin, I would like to introduce the doctors that we have with us today. We've got Dr. Bhumi and we've got Dr. Tom. So thank you so much for coming on with us today. And I guess just before we begin, just a few minutes to introduce yourselves, let us know who you are, what you do in your spare time, and then we can go on with the questions that we have for today.
I'm Dr. Bhumi, and I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. I am a practicing pediatrician in a private practice for 20 years now. I have 2 children that are now grown, and so I have a lot more free time, and I like to travel. I'm actually training to do a 5K and then a 10K, so hopefully in November we'll do that. And then, of course, I love pediatrics and being at the office and educating the parents as much as possible.
Thank you. And Dr.
Well,
Tom.
I have been a general pediatrician for about 30 years. I live and practice on Long Island in New York. I have 4 children, most of whom are adults. I do have, my daughter is going to be a senior in high school, so we will have an empty nest sometime in the near future. I have a very busy practice, so I don't tend to have a lot of free time, to be honest, but the things I enjoy doing other than spending time with my family are very sports related, both participating and spectating in many different sports.
Brilliant. Sounds busy. So thank you for taking your time today and being with us. The topic that we're going to be discussing today is the impact of excessive screen time for our children's health and development. And I know that's a big topic that has obviously come up as well with COVID. A lot of kids were learning over Zoom, that increased their screen time. And I guess the first question that I have for you is, as doctors, I guess we'll also speak about it, I'm sure, as parents as well, is what is the biggest health implication of children spending too much time in front of a screen? So whichever one wants to go for it first, please.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely we have seen a lot of new diagnoses or more of these diagnoses. One of the main complaints I get is sleep issues. Let's see, we get neck pain, back pain. We get more anxiety, more depression, behavioral problems, and then of course, just overweight, obesity, and so forth. Now, all of these are all multifactorial, of course, right? I mean, I can't just say screens are causing all of these problems, but increased screen time, I think, has contributed to all of these diagnoses and problems. One of the biggest things, and probably Dr. Tom can attest to this, is my well visits. I spend so much more time on talking about, good sleep hygiene, and invariably, majority of them have to do with the fact that they're still on their screen at, close to bedtime. What happens is we all naturally secrete melatonin when the sun goes down, when we're calm, and that's why we all sleep well at night. And now with these screens, it's actually suppressing our melatonin. So these kids are not able to fall asleep, until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. I mean, some teenagers, it's 1 or 2 o'clock. So I really do see that big impact. So I really try to talk about that. Of course, the neck pain and the back pain, it's just posture. Right. I mean, we're sitting there with our necks down like this, looking at our iPads and iPhones and so forth. Obesity, let's just put it that way. Listen, we're sitting idly in front of a TV, watching a movie or watching short videos and so forth, and we're not physically active. So that I also have to emphasize, make sure you include, 60 minutes of activity every single day, which I didn't have to used to do that, right? Everyone used to just play outside because we didn't have screens. So that's obviously contributing to obesity. And when we sit idly, what do? We snack, we eat. And what are the easiest snacks? It's the processed junk foods, right? I'm not going to see a child go into the refrigerator to get a carrot to eat versus going into the closet and getting a bag of chips. It's just easier. And if you look at like the ads that you're going to see on videos and so forth, they're targeted towards our young kids wanting to eat the Oreo cookies or wanting to eat the junk food. So all of those really contribute to like the obesity. And then, of course, anxiety, depression. I'll let Dr. Tom, I know if you want to weigh in on the anxiety and depression, that is definitely increased.
Sure.
We're stealing all the points for you.
Yes.
No, that was a really good rundown. Even before talking about that, I just think we should talk about, well, what is screen time? What counts as screen time? So kind of it's self-explanatory. So it's really electronic devices that contain a screen. So it's not just your phone or an iPad. It includes television, it includes video games, it includes any kind of tablet or computing-like device that you use. So if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, those were devices that were typically used by adults and then maybe young adults. But now, all the way down into the toddler years, you see kids using tablets, sometimes theoretically for educational reasons, but the use of electronic devices has really kind of penetrated all the way down to infancy and the toddler years over the past few years. So in terms of...
Dr. Tom, sorry I'm interrupting you, but from what you said, it just reminds me that I went back to a friend a few months ago. She had a baby, and no jokes, the baby's 8 months old, and she was feeding her whatever it was before she went to bed, her vegetables and her fish, whatever it was, and she was watching this kids, shapes and numbers and everything, and I was like, she's 8 months old. She definitely didn't ask for it, so she's not that advanced. She said, oh, she won't eat her supper without it, and I was like, what? She's 8 months old. You've clearly just like, she was a blank piece of paper when she was born. You've clearly created that, and we all obviously create that as parents, but 8 months old, it was like, wow, that was when it literally goes from adults to all the way down. 8 months is quite young.
Correct.
So completely, that shocked me.
Yeah, and in terms of what counts as screen time, at least when I have conversations with families, I take care of what I don't count are truly educational uses of screen time. So as you had alluded to in the introduction, especially with COVID and quarantine and many children having to, in the past and still currently, do education from home, that doesn't really count in my mind. So there are very educationally sound and instructional reasons to use screens. So to me, it's really recreational screen time is kind of what we're talking about. The times where it's necessary to be used is, I don't want to say a necessary evil, but it is the reality. And moving forward is going to be the way that education is provided across the next few generations. So in terms of the downsides of screen time, I think Bhumi touched on the majority of it, and a lot of it's really going to depend on which age group you're talking about. So if you look at your example of an infant who's exposed to screen time, really for infants to develop appropriately, they really need social stimulation. And the example that you gave is a great example. So a child should be, during mealtime, engaged with the adults or siblings in their life and not being occupied by a screen. And there are clear studies that have drawn associations, not necessarily direct cause and effect, but associations between delays in appropriate development in terms of different developmental milestones in infants and toddlers who are exposed to screens either at all or to an excess, depending on the age group that you're talking about. And a lot of the negative effects also depend on the content of what is being delivered on the screen. So Bhumi's kind of entree into the discussion about anxiety and depression, there's certainly a lot of discussion in the preteen and teen age group around issues of anxiety and depression and exposure to social media. Obviously, social media being delivered via screen devices. So in that case, it's really not so much the screen device, it's what's being delivered on the device. And that, comes back to discussions as well about video games, exposure to violence, and a lot of other topics we're probably going to get to before our afternoon is over.
There's hours to talk about this, 100%. And I think that, as we say, if it goes from adults, that actually can't go to sleep without, unplugging their phone and putting it away from their bedside table, to literally 8-month-old babies that can't eat their supper without watching whatever it is, Peppa Pig or the animals or whatever it is. We can talk about this for hours. But I'd like to move on to the next question because I think that we've kind of like touched on it a bit. But in your experience, are there any types of screen use that is better or worse? You know, I mean, I know you said before you touched on the concept of the TV, which is different to to kind of a kid there's a TV in the dining room that everyone's watching together, whereas a child is in his room on their own, on their iPad or on their phone, on their screen, depends on their age. You know, would you say is there any type of screens that is worse or one of those is better for use for the child? And again, it depends on the age, but just generally, that's, I know we kind of touched on it a bit.
So basically, what I usually like to say is there's different types of screen time, right? Just kind of like what Tom kind of alluded to. Hey, there's passive, which is, hey, I'm just sitting there and I'm watching TV or I'm watching short videos on my iPad, so forth. And I mean, I generally tend to put that on the bottom of our list of it not being so healthy, of course, because again, you just idly sit there, you're not really learning anything, and you do create the bad habits of eating and so forth. Then there's passive, I would say. There's educational, which again, agree with Tom, that educational one is, hey, there's always good to technology. And that's probably one of the best things to happen to us, that, hey, our children were able to learn even in the midst of COVID and so forth. But then there's interactive, and that's where I would put like the video games. And, again, I would say there's a few positives to that, but again, everything in moderation. Studies have shown that, those who play video games, they do learn some problem solving skills. They do have hand-eye coordination, but the drawbacks of those, of course, are going to be like, hey, addictive personalities and then eventually exposure to violence. And again, also how age appropriate are they? And then, of course, the last one I would say is the social media, which to me, and again, there's positive to social media. I myself am in pediatrician groups. I'm in mommy groups and I'm in travel groups, and I have learned so much. It's connected our world, right? We're no longer isolated. We get to learn from each other. But again, it's the other issues that are coming with social media. I always tell my patients, I'm like, hey, listen, when I was young, if my friend decided not to include me in something, I would never know. But now everyone's posting. So now, these children, unfortunately, feel like they were left out, and then they, it saddens them. And then they, of course, are questioning their confidence, like, hey, why wasn't I included? Other issues, their role models are now, pictures of people who are edited. Their bodies are edited, their faces are edited. And so some of these children, especially our adolescents, are trying to attain something that's not attainable, so that causes a lot of anxiety and depression. Comments that people make on your picture. People can be mean, and so you get the cyberbullying. So to me, social media is, again, one of those not so healthy, screen times that we're seeing. But again, everything in moderation. And then, of course, social media can also be very addictive. How many times do you say, I'm going to go and hurry up and check my Instagram or Facebook, for 2 minutes, and 2 hours later, you're still on there looking at more and more things, but I like to categorize basically the screen times in those 4 categories to my patients, and kind of explain to them, the drawbacks and also the positives, and how if as a family we learn to use it properly, then as an adult, you'll have healthy habits also.
Mm-hmm. And as I'm not changing the question, because obviously I want to hear from you, Tom, but as obviously, you meet so many people and you speak to them, do they really not know this? Meaning, do you feel like they know it, but it's just too difficult to do? Or do they really not know this?
I do feel like most people do know this. And really, if you go back to, infant and toddlers, I feel like it starts there. We all get bored. And when our children didn't have screen time and they were bored, they were forced to go find something. Now you could just, if you're bored, you just pick up a screen and you entertain yourself and you engage. And so I think it just became an easy avenue. And so, yes, I can't blame, I think this is part of our environment now. And so we have to reteach everyone on, hey, you know what, we need to take our children outside, kick the ball. We have to play a board game with them. We have to make sure that they're learning how to cope with boredom. I mean, I think that's where it starts with.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean,
Dr. Tom.
I think there are a lot of different parenting styles, and I think that over time, as generations have changed, parenting styles and approaches vary, and a lot of that comes from the experience of the parent when they were a teenager or a youth. So if you're looking at, parents who are now in their 20s or early 30s, they're kind of in that generation that is used to using screens. I'm much older than that. I won't tell you how old, but I didn't grow up in the concept of
You don't
screen
dare between
usage.
anyone, Dr. Tom.
So my parenting style, when I was raising my kids, had nothing to do with screens, even though, as they were hitting their teens is when, iPhones, et cetera, started to come into the fore. But for me, that was never a way that I was raised or something I was used to. So I think younger parents, and it's not a knock, that's what they're used to. They're used to the values of screens. And, I echo what Bhumi said, this isn't meant to be a conversation knocking screen time, because there's benefits to screen time when it's used appropriately. So I don't believe that there's a screen that's preferable to another, but it all comes down to content and the limits that are applied. There are some surgeons in surgical training programs who encourage surgeons in training to play video games, because there's some, I'm not sure concrete, but soft evidence that, certainly hand-to-eye coordination is significantly improved if you practice with using screens. We haven't talked about the whole issue of virtual reality and the use of virtual reality, which involves screens for professional education, education in other forums. So I don't believe that the screen is the problem. It's, again, the controls that are placed on it, and that becomes the parenting style of creating limits in terms of how their children become accustomed to using screens in a healthy and productive way.
100%, 100%. I feel like I'm getting wisdom from you guys about what you have noticed in the past with the people that you've seen, and how it's impacted them. But I think that, as both of you said so clearly, is that it really, really, really goes way back to the beginning of how we educate our kids. Where do we put our boundaries? Not to be scared of putting boundaries. Knowing, really feeling strong enough to be able to say, okay, that is a red line, and that's where we realize that that's already interfering with their health, their mental health, their physical health, as you said. So yes, this talk is with doctors, but I think that, as you both said very clearly, it starts way before they even enter your office, before they even come and talk to you.
I think really
but I guess it's nice that they. What do you say?
I think really what it starts with is role modeling primarily.
Correct.
And that I think comes to parenting, period. Parenting from A to Z is about parents being good role models. So whether that's role models about how you live with using alcohol or other substances in your life, and having your teenagers see how you use substances, if you do at all, and certainly the use of screen time in a healthy and a productive way. Certainly, the comment a lot of teenagers give is, well, Mom, you use your phone all the time at the dinner table, like, why can't I?
Yeah.
And exactly to the
100%.
point, that is absolutely a pertinent point. So, and a lot of parents think, well, I'll be a parent when my kid's 15, but parenting and setting limits starts from birth. There are so many things early in infancy that, maybe it's not role modeling at that point, but setting limits in a healthy way, whether it's around a sleep environment, whether it's around issues of diet and nutrition, and certainly the use of screens over time, all comes down to parents being comfortable setting limits and being good role models for modeling good, healthy behaviors.
Absolutely.
I agree with you 100%. I think any topic that we're going to talk about is going to end, or start really with that idea. So, so thank you for that. I guess this is another question that, as I think you both are going to be very much. It depends on. But from what you've seen, from your experience, what would you say is the maximum amount of time per day that parents should let their kids, if they have that control, go on screen time without it impacting their health and development too much? Because obviously everything is going to impact to the good and to the worst. But do you have any idea of the amount that you would suggest parents to allow the kids in screens?
So, I mean, obviously, if we go by the book and what American Academy of Pediatrics says, we're going to say, hey, listen, less than 2 years old, we don't want anything. Between 2 and 12, fine, we can do about an hour a day. And above 12, which includes us adults too, 2 hours a day. Now, again, those are hard and set numbers, which, and again, I have discussions with my patients that we no longer can do hard set rules. I mean, it's just, how are we measuring? Oh, I spent 5 minutes on Instagram and then, then I did a quick 15-minute video, so obviously we can't add up those. For the younger children, of course you can. You can set parental control and so forth and do that. But as they're getting older, it becomes a little tougher. So I like to use it more like instead of limiting, the exact time, especially for our adolescent and older or even school age, is let's do good screen hygiene. And what does that mean? Say, hey, listen, here's the rules. And when you're in a room with other people, put the phone down, put the iPad down, learn how to engage in conversation, learn how to read people's body language, their facial expressions, develop these social skills. So if there's somebody else in the room, put your phone or iPad or turn off the TV. Same thing, it goes with the dinner table and so forth. And then of course, if you are going to be playing video games, set some limit of, hey, how long are you going to play it? And, and warn the children, hey, listen, you know what, your time is almost up. Go ahead and finish up what you're doing. Just kind of like what we've done with everything else. Hey, if they're playing outside and they have to come in for dinner, hey, you know what, wind up what you're doing and let's go ahead and come on in. So again, if we use good habits, kind of like what Tom said, is setting these habits are from toddler age, or infancy and toddler age. The example that you gave about your friend, basically what I tell parents like that is say, listen, educational videos may seem wonderful, but imagine if you took an educational toy and you sat down with your child and you did numbers and puzzles. Now, not only did you educate them just like the video, but now you are working on your fine motor skills, you're working on your social skills, you're working on your senses, and you're no longer one-dimensional. And so again, it's not limits, it's really let's set good habits. But again, those hours were the limits by American Academy of Pediatrics, of course.
Sure. And also you built that relationship with your child, meaning she's watched a 20-minute video on a screen while her mother was probably on her phone doing something else, and then you've missed out on that incredible connection. When they're 15 and they're having supper, they're not interested in you talking to them or you having that. You really, it's so important. So thank you for that. Thank you, Dr. Tom.
I think one of the health consequences that has probably been most consistently scientifically validated that excess screen time leads to are concerns around being able to maintain a healthy weight. And that comes down to a couple of different parameters. So one is the amount of screen time, and the other is the content of what you're watching on the screen. And Bhumi had referred to that earlier. So in terms of the amount of screen time, the conversation I like to have with my patients is kind of a trade-off. So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation, and there's a mnemonic 5210, which is used to educate families about healthy habits that can lead to maintenance of healthy weight. Part of the mnemonic is that you should have no more than 2 hours of screen time a day and 1 hour of physical activity each day. So the conversation I often have is kind of a ratio. So, if it's a lazy summer day and it's raining and you want to do 3 hours of screen time, well, then you owe me an hour and a half of physical activity. So it's trying to find that balance of sedentary activity as well as physical activity. It is as well the messages that children receive in terms of information streamed to them through consumerism. So whether it's, sugary cereal commercials or other things that are going to lead to unhealthy calorie consumption, it is while you're sitting and consuming information on the TV or a streaming device that you're going to get mixed messages that are going to negatively affect your health. And really one that I preach both in my personal life and professionally is not having screen times in a bedroom. And there's very good scientific validity to the benefit of not allowing children and teenagers to be able to have a television in their bedroom. The famous for my children over the years is, well, my friend can, why can't I? You know, you're getting a new TV, that nice TV would fit in my room. And, it's been a strict rule in our house forever. And my kids range from 17 to 30. None of them ever had a television in their bedroom. And ability to try and limit phone usage gets a little bit harder as kids get older, but the concept of having your teenager charge their phone in the kitchen overnight so they can't take their cell phone to their bedroom with them, lie under the covers, and do Instagram all night long are rules. And again, if those rules are established when your child is 9 or 10 or 11, it's a little bit easier than if you wake up one day and tell your 16-year-old, guess what, the rules just changed overnight.
Yeah, 100%. Good luck to all those parents. That's what I will say. Easier said than done.
And to touch upon what Tom was saying about setting those rules at 9 or 10, the other thing is, yes, you can't set them for your teenagers. And honestly, I try to tell the parents, listen, your children are teenagers. You got a few more years and then they're independent. So we really want to set good rules at 9 or 10 so that when they are teenagers, they might, go over a little bit and sneak their phone into their room here and there, but at least that foundation is set because, when they're off to college or they're independent, nobody has control over that. But what we did as parents is instill in them those values. And that's really, but you can't do that.
It's in their bloodstream.
But you can't do that unless those foundations were set when they were younger. Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess my next question is about a study. Recent study that suggests that ADHD diagnosis they've increased by 30% in the past 8 years. And my question to you is that do you see a connection between excessive screen time and obviously the increase in ADHD in the past 8 years?
Yes, I think from what I have read in the literature, the conclusion is that there has been found to be an association, but not a direct cause and effect relationship. So the difference is if you ask the question of 100 children who are diagnosed with ADHD, did they tend to consume more screen time than children who don't have that diagnosis? And the answer seems to be yes. So ADHD, like many medical conditions, is extremely multifactorial, whether it be genetics or other environmental factors. So I don't believe anybody has come to any firm conclusion that excess screen time is a direct cause of the formation of ADHD, but there is an association between children who do use excess screen time and the possibility that it may have a negative effect on emotional health, as well as other developmental problems that would include things like ADHD.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I agree with Tom on that. A lot of it is, are these behaviors from the excess screen time behaviors that mimic ADHD-like, behaviors? So again, no direct cause and effect. But a lot of things that we look at is, hey, when again, kind of where we go back to, I don't know how to satisfy my boredom, but by going by a screen. And then what we're starting to see is these children are demanding instant gratification, and when they don't know how to deal with delays, we see increased impulsivity. Right, and that's somewhat to do mimicking ADHD and so forth. So I think there are a lot of behavioral issues from the screens, but not necessarily can I say it causes ADHD.
Right. Okay, thank you. I think that the more questions we have, I think that we covering through the answers, we're covering a lot of other areas, which is great. But so I guess the last question is very much something that we've already spoken about. But I guess maybe to summarize, a few good tips for parents, for not just parents, anyone that feels that this is something that's really, a very big part of our lives, and tips to help them, whoever they are, with this concept of excessive screen time, without obviously, causing World War III. Do you have any, I guess you've already all suggested, maybe kind of summarizing it in like 3 points or 4 points, so we can actually come out of this webcast with some tools to make a difference, because that's what it's all about.
Sure. Good.
Good, Bhumi.
As a parent, and as a doctor.
Number one is Dr. Tom already discussed it. Is you have to be the role model. You can't be sitting there binge watching. You can't be sitting there on your phone during dinner time. And so number one is just be a role model for the family. Number two, I would say, is get them involved in other activities. Go for bike rides, go for walks, play board games. Number three is screen-free bedrooms. I mean, just like Tom said, my children never had a screen in their rooms. And that is going to not only just cut their screen hours, but lots of battles, during the evening time and bedtime. So if you cut those off. Another one, of course, is there's a lot of parental control apps out there where you can, set, what you want them to be watching and not watching. You can set amount of time you want them to be on their devices. So those would be a few, and I know Tom probably has a few more, and I'll let him do, but yeah, that would be a summary.
But we've stolen the best ones.
Yeah, I think the one that I would add is setting limits and not being afraid to set limits. And I think that extends into a lot of issues around parenting, even outside of this particular topic. So I think children developmentally thrive with consistency. What confuses a child more is if the boundaries that they're being held to keep moving. So if they kind of know where the walls are that they can operate within, they're going to push the boundaries, they're going to push the limits at different age groups, and that's totally fine and healthy. But if they understand the limits, and the most important thing is that those limits are consistent, they can function better, and the entire family will be emotionally healthier. I think sometimes parents are afraid to set limits because they think somehow their child won't like them. They are afraid of not developing a good relationship with their child over time. But I have found both personally and professionally that there's a tremendous value in setting reasonable limits. And the most important thing is that all adults in the child's life agree to those limits. Another common misoccurrence is, mom says you can use your phone and dad says you can't. So mom and dad are constantly fighting about whether you can use the phone or you can't use the phone. So again, for children to thrive developmentally, they need to have consistent limits and they need to understand what those limits are. And I think that if you set limits from the beginning around the topic of screen time, that as Bhumi said, by the time your kids are teenagers and adults, they will have a good groundwork of an understanding of what's in their best physical health and emotional health, and be able to function independently as an adult when you're not around to remind them what's good for them or not.
Yeah, amazing. I think that was very very interesting as a parent as well. I think that, like, kind of as a joke, from what you just said about the parents not arguing, I feel like sometimes they need to have, like, before we talk to them about excessive and excessive screen time, maybe we need to do like a parenting course beforehand. I mean, we're going lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, because that's such a obviously, being a model is number one. But you're right. When you have this, the father says this, the mother says this, it's just the kid and they play around with it as well. It's a great game for them. They know exactly who to go to and when and what buttons to press. They're much cleverer than us. But as a parent with kind of like a parent hat, I heard something very interesting that somebody said once that, if they have screen time, whatever that limited time is, everyone is different. I don't think that there's one book that can define, the answers to every family, because obviously every family's and their needs are different. And with knowing these rules and these suggestions that you just said, really obviously helps, and makes this whole topic so much more controlled and in a healthy way. So somebody said to me that once it was very important to ask the child what they're going to do after their screen time. So let's say they're having now an hour, whatever that is, and then so say, what are you going to do after? Okay, after you're going to go out and play football, or you're going to first play football for an hour and then you're going to go and, meaning, show them that it's part of their journey. It's not just, as you say, sit there for an hour and then you binge the chocolate and the, and the chips and everything else that goes with it. It's kind of, we're more in control of it as opposed to it being in control of us. And I thought that was a very good and practical kind of, a tip for this topic as well. So thank you. I really, really appreciate your time, your wisdom, your experience with so many people that you speak to, and obviously, being able to control this a little bit more, obviously it manifests itself in so many other ways in life, whether it's physical health, mental health, relationships, parents and children, and I hope that through this webcam and people that watch it, they can gain from the tools and the tips that you guys have shared, which have been really interesting. And even if, I guess for me as a mother, I've known all these before, but it's always nice to have that reminder. As I said to you, Dr. Bhumi, do these people not really know, or do they just come because it's just sometimes good to just hear that reminder, something that inside, it's in your bloodstream, but just a reminder, don't let your children have their phone in the room, or, not let them learn how to say goodbye to somebody eye to eye, not just like, oh yeah, I'm seeing, okay, bye, yeah, have a good day. Meaning all these tools are sometimes just great to just remind us again and again that these are so important, and they're actually quite easy to do. And if we're on top of it, and as you said, Dr. Tom, that the boundaries are so important for children and for ourselves, then hopefully this whole topic will be something that people can really control in a better way. So thank you so much. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to say before we end this webcast, but I think that I've spoken enough as well.
No, thank you. It was a great conversation to have.
No, thank you. This was a great
very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there'll be more. So for everyone out there, there will be lots of interesting topics coming up, making sure that Dr. Tom and Dr. Bhumi are on board, that we can fill up their day schedule with lots of other chats that we have. So thank you.